Hello and welcome to BYJU'S IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at a column from page number 8 of the Delhi edition. This column deals with the ongoing geopolitics in South Asia's power trade. It has been published in the context of the new rules that India has brought out to govern and regulate the cross-border trade of electricity with its neighboring countries. These new rules of India on the import and export of electricity defines the contours of such trading relationship with key neighbors such as Bangladesh, Bhutan and Nepal. And it also lays down clear buying and selling limits for India. And according to the writer, this new electricity trade policy of India has a geopolitical dimension as it is designed to counter the Chinese influence in South Asia with regard to electricity trade. See, over the decades, India has built a strong power cooperation with three key South Asian neighbors, that is Bangladesh, Bhutan and Nepal. In Bhutan especially, India has made a lot of investments in its hydropower sector in order to tap the hydropower potential of this Himalayan state. As a result of these Indian investments and Indian assistance, Bhutan has emerged as a net exporter of electricity, and it has not only fetched additional revenue to the government of Bhutan, but it has also enabled Bhutan to become one of the highest per capita income countries in South Asia. Every year, Bhutan generates a lot of surplus electricity through these hydropower projects that are supported by India, and through the Indian grid, Bhutan has been able to export this surplus to neighboring countries such as Bangladesh and Nepal. Even Nepal being a Himalayan state with tremendous hydropower potential, India has paid a lot of attention to Nepal, particularly with regard to hydropower investments. However, these Indian investments in Nepal has not seen the same degree of success as it has seen in Bhutan. Because in Nepal, Indian projects have run into a lot of problems, including intense competition from Chinese power companies, and as well as protests by the locals at the ground level based on environmental concerns of these projects. Then upon this, even India has failed to an extent to live up to its commitments in Nepal, and the execution of several projects have been delayed due to the lack of timely technical and financial support from India. But despite this, India does have a close power cooperation agreement with Nepal, and through its own exports and as well as through the exports of Bhutan, India has been helping Nepal to bridge its electricity deficit. Even for Bangladesh, which faces considerable power problems, India has been a key supplier of electricity with the help of Bhutan. So it becomes very clear that as far as South Asia's power trade is concerned, India was always the lead country, and it was always determining the rules of this cross-border trade of electricity. But over the last 10 to 15 years, India has faced a formidable challenge in this regard due to the rising influence of China and the rising presence of Chinese power companies in South Asia. So in order to counter this rising Chinese influence, India has come out with a new set of rules to govern cross-border trade of electricity, and it contains several provisions that are designed to retain India's dominant position in South Asia as far as cross-border power trade is concerned. Through the new rules, India has cleverly placed a few restrictions on the ownership of power plants in these three countries. The new rules state that the power plants of these countries, if they are trading with India, then these power plants cannot be owned by third country companies, especially if this country is sharing a land border with India, and if India doesn't have a separate bilateral power sector cooperation agreement with that particular country. This rule of India is clearly directed at China and Chinese ownership of power plants in these countries. So if the power plants of Bangladesh, Bhutan and Nepal, if they are owned by a Chinese company, then it automatically excludes them from buying or selling electricity with India. Because by virtue of being Chinese companies, they become third country companies. And since China shares a land border with India, and since India doesn't have a separate bilateral agreement with China on power sector cooperation, the power plants in Bangladesh, Bhutan and Nepal that are owned by these Chinese companies, they cannot trade with India. Plus the new rules also proposes an elaborate set of surveillance measures in order to keep track of any change in ownership of these power plants. This provision has been introduced in order to prevent any possible future takeover of these power plants by Chinese investments. So essentially, India's new rules on the cross-border trade of electricity is defined by geopolitics of the region, and it has been designed to retain India's dominant position with regard to South Asia's power trade. See, this battle for dominance between India and China in South Asia's power sector has been going on for several years. In Nepal and Bangladesh, India has always faced intense competition from Chinese power companies, and this has been playing out over the last few years. From 2014 onwards, the Modi government tried to make use of the SAARC framework in order to liberalize electricity trade in South Asia. But these liberal reforms introduced by India were soon capitalized by Chinese companies which were looking to export electricity from Bangladesh and Nepal to the lucrative Indian market. So when this started happening, India started fearing the indirect involvement of China in its power market, and it also felt threatened by the rising dominance of China in South Asia's power sector. So immediately India retaliated and it revoked all these liberalization measures, even at the cost of curbing the participation of India's private sector in the power projects of its neighboring countries. But the new rules that have been brought out by India tries to strike a balance by allowing and enabling private sector participation in the power projects of neighboring countries while successfully blocking Chinese investments in these projects. So clearly, the new rules provide for an India-centric structure for governing and regulating the South Asian electricity market. India's desire is to retain the rule-setting powers so that it can retain its traditional dominance in South Asia's power trade. Then to further build upon this, India has proposed an ambitious project known as One Sun, One World, One Grid project. Through the platform created by the International Solar Alliance, which is again an Indian initiative, India has proposed a global super power grid that harnesses solar energy to build a multi-country power grid and power pool. Initially, India is looking to extend this initiative towards the West Asian and Southeast Asian countries, and in the future, it even plans to extend this global superpower grid to African nations as well. But the writer points out that for this ambition of India to succeed, what we need is a clear-cut institutional vision and an institutional structure that can counter what China has already offered to these regions. Because, for example, if you look at Southeast Asia, China is already very dominant when it comes to exporting electricity to Southeast Asian countries. Through other connectivity projects, China already has a dominant position in West Asia and as well as in Africa. So clearly, China already has a dominant position in these markets. But however, there is hope for India to counter China by successfully building a multi-country power grid and power pool under its ambitious One Sun, One World, One Grid project. The advantage for India is that these countries, they already feel that China is a hegemonic power, and especially in Southeast Asia, the countries are concerned about China's bullying tactics and its coercion, and this would make them ready to opt for a multi-grid power pool created by India, as it helps them to move away from their dependency on Chinese electricity. So with Southeast Asia as a starting point, India can slowly build a larger grid covering West Asia and Central Asia as well, and possibly even extend the multi-country grid to African nations also. Because unlike China, India is looking to promote a rules-based institution that can help put in place such an ambitious multi-country power grid and power pool. So this analysis basically paints a picture of the kind of geopolitical conflict going on between India and China as far as power trade in the region is concerned. Now let's take up a column from page number 9 in which the writer evaluates the cracks in the criminal justice system. To highlight how the cracks prevalent in the criminal justice system is hampering speedy justice, she takes up the example of the Vishnu Tiwari case in which the accused was recently acquitted by the Allahabad High Court after spending 20 years in jail for a rape case. Nearly 2 decades ago, Vishnu Tiwari was accused of committing a rape and he was charged under the relevant provisions of the Indian Penal Code and the SC/ST Prevention of Atrocities Act. Based on these charges, he was held guilty in 2003 by a lower court and he was awarded the life imprisonment. Following this ruling of the lower court, Vishnu Tiwari's lawyer had filed an appeal at the Allahabad High Court. But this appeal remained pending until 2019 because of a defective appeal that was filed by his lawyer. Such defective appeals arise usually because of certain missing documents or because of the wrong format of the appeal, and until these defects are rectified, cases are not listed for hearing at the courts. Unfortunately, in the Vishnu Tiwari case, his lawyer had no serious interest in pursuing the case and he had conveniently abandoned the appeal process. It is the job of the lawyer to rectify any such defective appeals and ensure that the cases are listed as soon as possible for immediate hearing. But due to the mistakes of his lawyer and due to India's outdated criminal justice system, the accused continued to serve his term that was awarded by the lower court without any scope for remedy from the judicial system. Usually, after a prisoner spends 14 years in jail, the state governments take up such cases for commutation, and ideally, he should have been commuted by the governor at least 6 years back. But both the state government and the Allahabad High Court were completely unaware of the defective appeal that had resulted in his continued incarceration. Finally, in 2019, it was a few good jail authorities who brought this matter to the attention of the Allahabad High Court and requested the High Court to appoint a new lawyer. And accordingly, the State Legal Services Authority was notified, which is responsible for providing legal aid, and a new lawyer was appointed in the case. Then finally, after 2 years of efforts, the Allahabad High Court has finally acquitted him. And this case is a clear illustration of the cracks that exist in India's criminal justice system. And according to the writer, the reason why Vishnu Tiwari couldn't get speedy justice is not because of his first lawyer who was completely unprofessional, but largely because of the archaic system, which still relies on paperwork and outdated procedures. And it's because of this poor design of our criminal justice system that he was denied justice for years together. See, in this particular case, Vishnu Tiwari finally got justice due to a few good individuals, such as the new lawyer who took up the case, and as well as because of the jail authorities who brought the matter to the attention of the court. But the criminal justice system cannot be allowed to depend on the goodness of a few individuals. And if that is the case, that would be a clear hallmark of an ineffective criminal justice system. So in order to plug these cracks in our criminal justice system, the writer suggests the establishment of an integrated digital platform that can provide for seamless real-time exchange of information related to a particular case between all the concerned stakeholders. See, in any criminal case, there are multiple institutions that are involved, and it is very essential to have effective communication and coordination between all the stakeholders in order to ensure speedy justice to both the victims and the accused. The various institutions involved in a criminal case include the police, the prosecutors, the forensic labs, the government itself, the legal services authorities, and of course the courts. So for a case to progress through all the stages, effective coordination and communication is needed between all these institutions, right from the stage of filing an FIR all the way until the final judgment is passed by the courts. See, in any criminal case, the FIR is first filed with the police, following which the police take up the investigation to collect sufficient evidence, and once they crack the case, they finally file a charge sheet that contains an exhaustive list of charges and evidence against the accused. Then these documents have to be made available to the prosecutors to take up the case for prosecution, and all the while, forensic labs will have to make their reports available to the prosecutors and as well as to the courts. And even the government and its concerned ministries and departments will have to keep track of these cases. And when prisoners are eligible for commutation, the state government should be automatically notified in order to ensure that these eligible prisoners are considered for commutation. Then even the state and national legal services authorities should be in the loop, as they are responsible for providing legal aid and for defending the legal rights of the accused and the victims. But unfortunately, this whole system of interaction between these institutions is still driven by paperwork and archaic rules, which eventually produces poor coordination and poor communication between the various stakeholders. Currently, it takes days and weeks together for paper documents to move from one institution to another, and there isn't an effective system in place to keep track of ongoing criminal cases. So it is in this context that the writer suggests the establishment of an integrated digital platform that can provide for real-time and seamless exchange of information, including the exchange of relevant documents, so that the existing gaps in the criminal justice system can be plugged in order to prevent the recurrence of such unfortunate incidents. Ironically, the courts have made a lot of progress in the adoption of e-courts and digitization, and even all the other stakeholders, including the police, the prosecutors, forensics, and as well as the government and the legal services authorities, they have all adopted digitization on their own. Currently, there is also work going on to establish an interoperable criminal justice system. But unfortunately, this hasn't enabled seamless communication between the various authorities because the current digital infrastructure created by these institutions, they are completely independent of each other and they continue to work in their jurisdictional silos. The existing digital platforms of these institutions, they adopt different formats and hence they are not even interoperable. So to reform the criminal justice system and to plug these gaps, the writer calls for the establishment of an integrated digital platform that can seamlessly connect all the stakeholders in the criminal justice system. Next, on page number 9, we have a column related to India's relations with Taiwan. See, officially, India and Taiwan do not have any diplomatic relations. This is because of India's commitment to the One China policy. See, prior to 1945, mainland China was ruled by a government known as the Republic of China. This Chinese government was challenged during the Chinese Civil War, during which the Maoists led an armed struggle against the Republic of China and they managed to overthrow the Chinese government. This Republic of China was pushed to Taiwan and the Maoists, they successfully managed to capture power, thus establishing the PRC or the People's Republic of China. So back in the 1950s, there were two Chinese governments that claimed to represent China, and one was the Communist PRC and the other was the Republic of China, which administered the small island of Taiwan. Then the PRC started insisting that there is only one Chinese government under its One China policy, and it started pushing countries around the world to abide by the One China policy. So as a result, most countries including India, they came to accept the One China policy and they only started dealing with the People's Republic of China as the legitimate representative government of the whole territory of China. So this commitment of India to the One China policy has prevented us from establishing official ties with the Republic of China that administers Taiwan. But however, since the 1990s, India's relations with Taiwan has improved despite the absence of official diplomatic ties. And especially in the domain of trade and economy and people-to-people relations, the two countries share a very close relationship. According to the writers of this column, this year marks the 25th anniversary of the India-Taiwan relationship, and hence they're calling upon both the countries to recalibrate their ties. See, India and Taiwan share a commitment to a set of common values and principles, which includes their faith in freedom and democracy, their commitment to uphold human rights, justice, and rule of law. And keeping this shared vision in mind, the writers suggest a few specific areas of cooperation for India and Taiwan. The ongoing global pandemic definitely presents a great opportunity for India and Taiwan to collaborate in the field of healthcare cooperation. India and Taiwan already have a close relationship with regard to alternative and traditional medicine, and they could further build upon this to jointly contain the pandemic and even to accelerate their respective vaccination programs. Then combating air pollution could be another area of cooperation. Both India and Taiwan are dealing with the menace of air pollution in their cities, and Taiwan could help out India with bio-friendly technologies especially to deal with the problem of stubble burning. Taiwan has already emerged as a leader in such bio-friendly technologies through which value addition can be made to agricultural byproducts and waste, which will not only help in bringing environmental benefits but could also help in increasing the farmer's income. Then both the countries could undertake joint research and development in the field of organic farming as well. But the most important aspect of the relationship, which deserves focus, is the people-to-people relations. Because cultural diplomacy is the very cornerstone of any exchange between two great civilizations. To further boost people-to-people relations, India and Taiwan could focus on promoting tourism in order to encourage the inflow of tourists into each other's countries. Then India could leverage its Buddhist heritage and appeal to the people of Taiwan to take up Buddhist pilgrimage in India, which would be in line with its Buddhist circuit initiative, which it has taken up to leverage its Buddhist heritage in Southeast Asian and East Asian countries as a part of its cultural engagement with the region. Then both the sides already share a close relationship with regard to trade, and they can actually complement each other in their core strength areas. If Taiwan is seen as a global leader in semiconductors and electronics, then India is seen as a global leader in information technology and IT-enabled services. So these core inherent strengths of India and Taiwan could complement each other, and they will have to further build upon their trading relationship in order to exploit the full advantages of the bilateral trade agreement that they have signed in 2018. Despite the existence of this agreement, Taiwan's investments in India is still very minimal, and currently there are around 200 Taiwanese companies that are operating in India, and they often face challenges because of India's rigid labor laws and regulatory framework. But now that India is in the process of implementing a new labor code, and considering India's improved ease of doing business ranking, it would be the right time for India and Taiwan to recalibrate their relationship, with special focus being given to trade and economy. Next, on page number 9, we have a column which evaluates the Government of National Capital Territory of Delhi Amendment Bill 2021 that was recently passed by the Lok Sabha, and as it seeks to strengthen the powers of the Lieutenant Governor over the elected Delhi government, and the writer labels the law as an extraordinary legislative misadventure that erodes federalism in the country. But since we have covered this topic in detail on the 23rd of March and as well as on the 16th of March, I would request you to go through this column once. Next, on page number 1, we have an article that provides us an important update on the India-Sri Lanka relationship. See, on the 19th of March, we had discussed in detail the upcoming UNHRC resolution against Sri Lanka, which accused the Sri Lankan government of committing gross human rights violations during the last phase of the civil war. So as this UNHRC resolution came up for voting, the Sri Lankan government was lobbying with India for support at the UNHRC to vote against the resolution. Then on the other hand, since India also has a commitment to ensure the well-being of the Tamil minorities in the northern and eastern provinces of Sri Lanka, the Tamil National Alliance, which represents the Tamil minorities in Sri Lanka, was also exerting pressure on India to vote for the resolution in order to secure justice for the Tamil minorities who were affected during the last phase of the civil war. But after a careful consideration, India has decided to abstain from this voting, thereby making it clear that while India seeks to protect the Sri Lankan government from any unnecessary international action, it continues to support the cause of the Tamil minorities to secure equality, justice, and dignity in Sri Lanka. Now finally, let's take up the mains practice questions. The first question, evaluate the geopolitics in South Asia's power trade. The second question, the implementation of an integrated digital platform for the criminal justice system would ensure speedy justice. Critically analyze. Kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the comment section below. This concludes our discussion for today. Thanks for watching.